Imagine a force more dangerous than pure evil, a force that does not manifest itself in the form of evil intentions, but rather through passivity, through the refusal to think critically and ask questions. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian and resistance fighter, discovered a disturbing truth during the rise of the Nazi regime. Not only malice, but above all, stupidity is the greatest threat to society. For Bonhoeffer, stupidity was not simply a lack of intelligence or knowledge, it was an active state of resistance to reasoning and reflection. A stupid person is not only ill-informed, but also refuses to consider new insights or facts. This makes stupidity not only frustrating, but also destructive. It prevents growth, blocks moral reflection, and makes individuals susceptible to manipulation. Where evil can be rationally exposed and combated, stupidity is immune to logic and argument. During the Nazi regime, Bonhoeffer watched the masses rally behind an authoritarian power without critical reflection. It was not only fanatical Nazis who made the regime possible, but also the silent majority who refused to resist intellectually or morally. This made the system not only powerful, but also dangerously inefficient. Decisions were made based on simplistic propaganda rather than critical insight. Bonhoeffer saw how power reinforces stupidity and how people in positions of influence often surround themselves with yes men, trapping them in a circle of self-assertion. Instead of rational deliberation, stupidity in this context acts as a powerful tool for the perpetuation of oppression. The real danger lies not in the malice of those in power, but in their inability or unwillingness to question the complexity of their own actions or challenge the status quo. The paradox Bonhoeffer exposes reveals a stark truth. Those who are stupid, and especially those who possess authority, can be far more dangerous than those who act out of sheer malice. Their thoughtless obedience to authority, their unwillingness to ask questions, and their resistance to intellectual growth make them powerful agents of social and political destruction. In a world where critical thinking and self-reflection are increasingly undervalued, these insights provide a poignant warning of the destructive power of stupidity and the far-reaching consequences it can have for society as a whole. Hannah Arendt, a German-American political theorist, further expanded Bonhoeffer's ideas on stupidity with her concept of the banality of evil. Arendt argued that the greatest evil in modern society does not necessarily come from evil or monstrous individuals, but rather from the mundanity of those who commit heinous acts without any reflection on their consequences. This idea, introduced in her analysis of Adolf Eichmann during the Nuremberg trials, shifted the focus from one's intrinsic badness to the disturbing capacity of ordinary people to become instruments of evil through thoughtless obedience and lack of critical engagement. Arendt argued that Eichmann, one of the main architects of the Holocaust, was not a sadistic monster, but a bureaucratic figure incapable of moral reflection. He simply followed orders without regard to the human toll of his actions. The banality of his crimes did not make him any less dangerous. On the contrary, it showed how evil in the modern world can flourish not only through psychopathic leaders, but also through the passive cooperation of people who fail to think critically about their role within larger systems. This concept fits seamlessly with Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity, as it underscores the danger of passivity and conformity. Eichmann's mindset is an example of how thoughtless obedience comes from stupidity rather than pure malice. He did not act from an intrinsic desire to do harm, but rather from an uncontrolled submission to authority. His failure to reflect on his own actions or acknowledge their consequences demonstrates the immense moral and intellectual paralysis that results when people refuse to think critically. This passivity made him a key figure within one of the most horrific regimes in history, underscoring how stupidity remains a dangerous and self-reinforcing force even outside the context of war and dictatorship. Modern societies are particularly vulnerable to the dangers of thoughtlessness. The constant pressure to conform and blindly obey authority creates an environment in which critical thinking is discouraged and passivity prevails. Totalitarian regimes eagerly exploit this psychological and intellectual inertia. By controlling the flow of information and reducing complex issues to simplistic, binary narratives, they cultivate a population that accepts their actions without questioning them. It is not the malice of the citizens that sustains these systems, but their intellectual passivity and inability to critically examine the world. This form of institutionalized stupidity acts as a powerful tool of oppression. It is individuals' refusal to question authority, disregard for moral responsibility, and inability to consider the broader consequences of their actions that make tyranny possible. Arendt's insight into the banality of evil is therefore a call to action, to not give in to the pressures of conformity, to remain vigilant against the temptations of simplistic thinking, and to critically examine the systems of power that shape our lives. It is a warning that evil often flourishes in the absence of reflection, and that our ability to make moral judgments is directly dependent on our ability to think independently and critically. In modern society, the banality of stupidity continues to manifest itself in the form of passive acceptance of oppressive ideologies and policies. Whether in the workplace, in the political arena, or within the social justice debate, one increasingly sees individuals blindly following orders or adopting simplistic worldviews without understanding their broader implications. This intellectual laziness, often disguised as loyalty or patriotism, poses one of the greatest threats to democratic values and human rights. The real challenge lies in awakening from this intellectual slumber, promoting independent thought, and ensuring that the mechanisms of power are subject to critical and moral scrutiny. British philosopher Bertrand Russell saw this trend as early as the 20th century and warned of the dangers of a society in which stupidity is not only tolerated but actively encouraged. He argued that political and social structures often reward ignorance, while independent thinking and critical reasoning are discouraged. In a world where complex issues are simplified into sound bites and slogans, the public is encouraged to embrace simplistic solutions that ignore the true complexity of problems. Russell saw this as a dangerous development, especially within political discourse, where a leader with a simple, emotionally appealing story is often more successful than one who offers nuanced, thoughtful analysis. This mechanism leads to a society in which intellectual laziness is not only tolerated but even rewarded. Populist leaders thrive in a climate where superficial answers are favored over deep insights. When ignorance is mistaken for authenticity and rational analysis is dismissed as elitist, An environment is created in which the banality of stupidity continues to spread. The lesson here is that true intellectual and moral freedom can only exist in a society that encourages critical thinking and values knowledge and reasoning. To arm ourselves and our society against this destructive tendency, we must actively invest in critical thinking, self-reflection, and the courage to stand up to the pressures of authority and conformity. Only by adopting this attitude can we escape the vicious cycle of stupidity and work toward a more just, thoughtful world. Fighting the banality of stupidity is not an easy task, but it is a necessary step to maintain intellectual and moral integrity and create a society based on truth, understanding, and justice. A society in which intelligence and reason are seen as burdens and superficial, simplistic beliefs are seen as virtuous, creates fertile ground for the rise of foolishness over intelligence. Individuals are drawn to stories that promise certainty and simplicity rather than facing the uncomfortable complexity of reality. Bertrand Russell analyzed this tendency, highlighting the psychological comfort associated with stupidity. People often prefer simple, black and white stories that offer clear answers to complex questions. Critical thinking, on the other hand, can be uncomfortable and challenging. It requires a willingness to embrace ambiguity, uncertainty, and contradiction, things many would rather avoid. The appeal of simple answers, especially when reinforced by media and political leaders, is extraordinarily strong. Russell understood that although intelligence requires effort and introspection, stupidity provides a false sense of security. The comfort of stupidity over the discomfort of thoughtful, critical engagement helps explain why ignorance so often trumps knowledge in modern society. This phenomenon is further compounded by the rise of mass media and social media in the 21st century. Russell's observations, though made in the mid-20th century, resonate deeply with today's media landscape, where disinformation and oversimplification reign supreme. In the digital age, the rapid spread of ideas through social media platforms has led to the rise of echo chambers, where people are exposed only to information that confirms their existing beliefs. This contributes to the creation of ideological bubbles where critical thinking gives way to groupthink. The constant stream of soundbites and the ease with which misinformation spreads make it increasingly difficult for individuals to think deeply and independently about complex issues. This intellectual laziness, encouraged by these platforms, creates an environment where ignorance is not only tolerated, but even nurtured. Russell's critique seems almost prophetic in this context, as the digital age has only accelerated the dynamics he warned about. In his essay, Philosophy and Politics, he further addressed the paradox that in many political systems, intelligence and rational thought can be seen as subversive or even dangerous. This is especially evident in authoritarian or totalitarian regimes, where rulers often prefer a compliant and uncritical population to one that questions or examines authority. Russell argued that the more intelligent and reflective individuals in a society are, the more likely they are to be at odds with the prevailing political ideology and thus marginalized or oppressed. This creates a cycle in which intelligence is not only devalued but actively suppressed, giving folly room to thrive. Just as Bonhoeffer analyzed the relationship between stupidity and authoritarianism, Russell emphasized the central role of intellectual passivity in sustaining oppressive systems. His critique of the triumph of stupidity over intelligence serves as a powerful warning. The process of rewarding ignorance and undermining critical thinking is not a passive phenomenon, but something actively promoted through political, social, and media influences. The consequences of this trend are far-reaching. A society that favors foolishness over reason is more susceptible to simplistic and dangerous ideologies, ignores critical issues, and enables political leaders to use ignorance as a weapon. Russell's insights force us to consider how our own society cultivates a preference for simplism and conformity. The question is not only whether we can reverse this trend, but whether we are willing to embrace the discomfort of intelligence and resist the destructive power of stupidity. By promoting intellectual curiosity and cultivating a culture of critical thinking, we can work toward a world where intelligence is valued rather than discouraged. After all, stupidity is not just an individual flaw, but a contagious social phenomenon that must be fought with knowledge, reason, and courage. In any society, ideas spread at lightning speed, whether rational or irrational. In particular, simplistic and unsubstantiated beliefs can penetrate deeply into the collective consciousness, often through repetition and social reinforcement. This phenomenon of intellectual contagion threatens critical thinking and independence of mind because it creates an environment in which conformity is rewarded and dissent is discouraged. The spread of stupidity in a society is no accident. It is the result of deep-rooted psychological and social processes. People naturally seek security and affiliation with a group. As a result, they are often attracted to stories that sound simple and convincing, even if they are not based on facts. Group pressure and social structures play an essential role in reinforcing ignorance. For example, in highly polarized societies, ideological loyalties become more important than truth, so individuals tend to adopt their group's beliefs without critical reflection. The role of mass media and social media in this process cannot be underestimated. In the modern world, information spreads with unprecedented speed, with fact and fiction becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish. The algorithms of social media platforms reinforce existing beliefs, exposing users to one-sided perspectives that confirm their worldview. This leads to the formation of so-called echo chambers, in which dissenting opinions are ignored or actively opposed. Disinformation and simplistic narratives gain ground as a result, not because they are correct, but because they are constantly repeated and widely shared. Another important factor in the spread of irrational ideas is the influence of authority and hierarchy. From an early age, people are conditioned to respect authority figures and accept their statements often without much criticism. In some cases, this is functional, but in other situations it leads to an unhealthy dependence on leaders and experts without critically weighing their words. Totalitarian regimes use this dynamic to suppress dissent. But even in democratic societies, blind reliance on authority can undermine intellectual diversity and critical thinking. The danger of this social contagion is not only the spread of irrational beliefs, but also the decline of intellectual diversity and the stifling of critical discourse. When a society conforms to simplistic and unsubtle thinking, it becomes increasingly difficult to consider alternative perspectives or challenge established ideas. This leads to stagnation and a decline in collective intelligence. To counteract the negative effects of the social contagion of stupidity, it is essential to foster a culture of critical thinking and intellectual curiosity. This means encouraging people to ask questions, verify sources, and be open to complex and sometimes uncomfortable truths. Education plays a crucial role in this, as does the responsibility of media to provide objective and nuanced reporting. Ultimately, stupidity is not just an individual failing, but a collective problem perpetuated by social structures. By actively investing in education, open debate, and intellectual autonomy, societies can protect themselves from the destructive power of intellectual contagion and build a future where knowledge and reason are nurtured rather than undermined. When conformity becomes the norm and independent thinking gives way to social harmony, an environment is created in which groupthink prevails. In such an environment, original ideas are suppressed, debates become more superficial, and intellectual progress stagnates. This leads to critical thinking individuals being marginalized or even excluded. It takes conscious effort to resist this tendency and cultivate intellectual autonomy. A key strategy here is to develop a mindset that embraces curiosity and skepticism. Instead of blindly accepting information, people must learn to critically analyze and test the reliability of sources. This means being willing to step outside one's comfort zone, consider new ideas, and challenge established beliefs. Independent thinking requires courage because it often goes against peer pressure and the tendency toward conformism. Critical thinking should not be seen as a one-time skill, but as a lifelong process that requires ongoing self-reflection and openness to other perspectives. In a world where misinformation spreads at lightning speed, it is essential to develop intellectual resilience. This enables individuals not only to form a better understanding of reality themselves, but also to contribute to a society where thoughtful and informed debate remains possible. The social spread of superficial thinking can only be countered by active resistance. By encouraging critical thinking and embracing intellectual diversity, people can escape the grip of collective irrationality. Education, open dialogue, and a commitment to independent thinking are crucial tools in this struggle. Only in this way can we break the dominance of simplistic ideologies and reaffirm the value of intellectual complexity. Thinkers such as Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell already warned of the dangers of a society in which passivity and unthinking obedience predominate. They showed that stupidity is not just an individual problem, but a social challenge with potentially disastrous consequences. However, because these mechanisms are social in nature, they can also be combated through collective effort. To protect intellectual autonomy, we must make constant efforts to remain critical and independent thinkers. This means questioning authority, seeking complex truths, and accepting uncomfortable insights. True intellectual growth requires humility and a willingness to acknowledge that one can be wrong. In an age when people increasingly consume only information that confirms their existing worldview, embracing opposing perspectives is crucial. Arendt's analysis of the banality of evil underscores the importance of moral and intellectual reflection. The greatest danger lies in the willingness of individuals to abandon their moral responsibility and intellectual autonomy. This makes it all the more urgent to reject passive obedience and take an active role as critical thinkers in society. Taking responsibility for our thoughts and actions is not an option, but a necessity. Bertrand Russell criticized the domination of simplism over intelligence and warned against systems that cultivate ignorance. In modern societies, we see that intelligence is often devalued and superficiality rewarded, especially in the political arena. To guard against this, we must be alert to the forces that influence our thinking patterns and the structures that perpetuate intellectual laziness. Only by actively pursuing knowledge and critical thinking can we break the power of irrationality and create a future in which intellectual depth and reflection are central. In our society, conformity is often rewarded and divergent. Thinking is discouraged, especially when dealing with complex issues. Bertrand Russell emphasized that it is essential to have the courage to critically examine dominant narratives and resist forces that simplify complex issues into superficial slogans and popular statements. Developing a critical attitude toward the world and not blindly adopting offered information is the first step toward intellectual independence. One of the most powerful disseminators of intellectual passivity in today's society is the media, especially social media. Here, ideas are often reduced, taken out of context, and spread at a rapid pace. Algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, prioritizing sensational and emotionally charged content over nuanced and thoughtful analysis. This creates an environment in which misinformation and superficial thinking flourish. To escape this, we must learn to distinguish between reliable and misleading information. Developing media literacy and recognizing bias, propaganda, and distorted facts is crucial to avoid getting carried away by the social media echoes. In addition, it is important to surround ourselves with people who challenge us and encourage intellectual growth. Although social pressure has a strong influence, we can consciously choose an environment that values critical thinking, diversity of views, and intellectual honesty. By cultivating these networks, we create a counterbalance to the tendency toward conformism and build a culture in which new and complex ideas can flourish. Another essential aspect of intellectual growth is cultivating humility in thinking. This means recognizing that no one has complete knowledge and that there is always room for learning and revision of beliefs. In a society where self-assurance and conviction are often rewarded, it is all the more important to be open to new insights and willing to critically evaluate our views. This leads to a more inquisitive and reflective approach to the world. Escaping the cycle of intellectual laziness requires not only external awareness, but also internal resilience. We must learn to rely on our own ability to critically analyze information and question authority when necessary. In a world full of disinformation and superficial thinking, this is a challenge, but not an impossible task. By constantly stimulating ourselves, questioning, and continuing to evolve, we protect ourselves from the trap of groupthink and become active participants in the formation of a more conscious and thoughtful society. The insights of thinkers such as Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell provide valuable guidance for countering intellectual stagnation. Although the forces that maintain ignorance are strong, they are not insurmountable. By committing ourselves to lifelong learning, moral reflection, intellectual courage, and social responsibility, we can resist the spread of stupidity. This is important not only for our personal lives, but also for the health of our society as a whole. Want more insights on critical thinking and intellectual independence? Subscribe to our channel, give a like, and leave a comment. We bring you new content daily to help you grow and deepen your knowledge. Click the link in the description for book tips to help you further along in your intellectual journey. Stay curious, stay critical, and keep asking questions. Until next time.